Hello everyone and welcome to tonight's instalment of The Cauldron. Tonight we have got a special guest and our first male guest, Kyle, who you'll probably know as Cap Starky. So Kyle, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks for having me on, ladies. This might not be the ladies' safe space for the next however long this is going to go on for, but great pleasure to be on with you. I'll just tell you a bit about myself. My YouTube channel, Cap Starky, it was mainly a rugby channel up until probably about June this year, when I really kind of got more into the stuff going on with GRA and Scottish politics and the Scottish hate crime bill, which being a free speech advocate, I'm firmly against. I think that's going to be an absolute disaster for Scotland overall if that's implemented into law. I suppose my whole thing with the whole GC thing started probably around 2018 when I saw a lot of this stuff coming up with transgenderism, and there was a couple of folk I wouldn't call friends, but I knew on Facebook on my Facebook who were coming out as trans, and at the time I was thought, okay, whatever, live and let live. But then the news story came up about that interested me was Graham Linehan having the police come to his door because he dead named, which is obviously wrong pronoun term used by this cult. He dead named a trans activist and was warned about it. And I thought, from a free speech standpoint, why are the police getting involved in silly things like that? And then I started looking into it a bit more and I thought, okay, this is weird. And then I got into a couple of conversations with folk on social media, and one of them said they had a trans child, and then and I was like, what is a trans child? And then I started looking into it more and it just kind of woke me up. But it really probably took me a year or two after that to actually finally put my voice out there on the matter, because again, I was having conversations with folk probably more on the other side, and I kept getting told, oh, that's offensive if you think that, that's offensive if you think that. And I was just kind of thinking, I don't think it's right that you should be telling children that they might be born in the wrong body. And I don't think it's right either that, any man could just self-identify as a woman and be allowed into women's spaces. And, the same thing with the whole, children that probably grow up to be homosexual or autistic children. I think it's wrong that you're telling them they might be in the wrong body. But again, it took me a while to actually put my voice out there on it, because I had moments when I was thinking, am I in the right, am I in the wrong? But then I thought, no, this is just wrong. I need to put my voice out here on it.
Well done you for saying something. And I mean, have you actually been sort of directly affected by stating these views publicly? I mean, what's been the backlash for you personally, if any?
Not so much personally, probably online, being called names quite a lot. I've been, as I said, been told what I'm saying is offensive because of various reasons, and but that's probably been about it. I've been quite lucky in that regard. But I just see also the way some of these people, like these trans activists, the way they speak to women, that was just really an absolute trigger for me, because I was raised in a very loving family. I was always thought, I've made an ass of myself when it comes to women. I think all men have at some point in their lives, it's safe to say. But I mean, I just think, the way these people speak to women, it's like, how is this deemed as as acceptable in society, that we're at a point where it's okay for men to be awful and horrible to women, but only if the men say they're now women? It's just not as bonkers.
In the name of inclusion, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, I also have deep misgivings about labelling children, especially as transgender, because children can be confused about their identity for so many different reasons, and certainly transgender, that is one possibility. But you usually find that children are confused because of trauma, there's maybe abuse or something, or they've experienced something really traumatic, or they're possibly gay, or lesbian.
Yeah, I think. So sorry, Claire. I think also I can speak from my own experience a bit, in that and being on the autistic spectrum myself, I experienced probably like some school bullying I did experience school bullying in school, And that kind of made me, I've always felt kind of more ostracized and more on the outside to a lot of people. And I think folk in those positions are very, very vulnerable to be told, look, there's a pathway. You might actually be born into the wrong body, and then we're going to put you on puberty blockers and hormone therapies and get you ready for your surgery when you're old enough. And
when you were at school, Kyle, was this a thing? Was this taught in schools then, or
no?
No.
No.
Do you think if it had been, that you might have been susceptible to it?
Yeah. I really like fearful that I would, because I had my moments as well where I played like dress up a bit, and as kids do, just like sort of wore dresses sometimes with dressing up a bit. But again,
I love that. I love the fact that boys can do that, and so can girls. I mean, I grew up in the 80s. That was part of life.
Yeah.
But, we weren't actually chopping off breasts or inverting penises to prove, how unique and special we were. And what annoys me and what really worries me is the fact that this affirmation stuff in school, what qualifies these head teachers, for example? I mean, I'm not having a go at head teachers, I'm asking the question, but what qualifications do they have to treat a child with body dysphoria, And to think that these people are in such a position of power, they're not only teaching queer theory in school and suggesting all these things to vulnerable children, but then if the child does disclose these things and says we don't want our parents to know, that's keeping the parents in the dark. And how on earth are we meant to support our own children if we don't know there's any problem? And it's a hostile environment for parents.
Absolutely. It's also this victim mentality it's encouraging, and it's encouraging these kids to think, look, these people will not accept that you're trans, and you must fight against this, and you must go against this. And again, with the whole parents thing, if they're unsure, would the teachers be encouraging them not to tell the parents? Because the laws that are coming in now, it's not saying that if you're going to a teacher saying you're trans, that you have to tell the parents.
And I know that Sex Matters at the moment, they're asking people to email or write to your MPs or MSPs about it's called press pause for conversion therapy law. So they're trying to rush that through, where they're basically going to they'll essentially criminalize parents or teachers or anyone who tries to discuss this issue. I mean, this is just talking about feelings that are really important, and I think that does need some careful consideration. So I would urge everyone to perhaps look at sexmatters.org, and they've got a letter that you can use as a basic template, and you can add your own comments. But certainly do that and let your MPs know that you don't think this is a good idea. To equate this with converting gay people in the 70s, 80s, etc., it's not the same thing at all.
Absolutely. And there's also a massive contradiction there in that they're trying to ban gay conversion therapy, yet they're pushing through this gender identity stuff. And as you know, a lot of these kids will generally grow up to be gay, and they'll grow out of their gender dysphoria by the time they reach the end of puberty.
Exactly. Honestly, this ideology is basically homophobic.
Absolutely.
And they get away with so much. Like you say, so many people are behaving so dreadfully towards women. I know that Denise is going to talk about Joanna Cherry, and it's so long as they say it's a trans issue, it's like they can carte blanche to say whatever they like about women, no thought or regard for women's rights, which is what we're all concerned about. Anyway, I'll let Denise.
On the conversion therapy, so it is a law going through the UK Parliament, which in some ways that might be merciful, because the UK Parliament seem to be slightly more rational than the Scottish Parliament on this. And and this is what they do, it's like a tactic to put the trans with the LGBT. And now, lesbian, gay or bisexual is an innate sexual desire for people of the same or opposite sex, or both, and you can't change it. It's immutable. It's like sex. And to try and say that is the same as being trans, which is a discomfort and a distress with your body. They're completely different things. So they're trying to put that on with the LGB. Now, if you think of conversion therapy in the 80s and 70s in the past, what it tended to be was saying to a woman who was a lesbian, try a man, you might like it. What is telling lesbians that they need to have sex with males if the man says they're a woman? That is conversion therapy. That's what it is. So this ideology wrapped into telling gay men they have to have sex with women, wrapped into telling lesbians they have to have sex with males, is conversion therapy. That's conversion therapy. This gender ideology is. So what Joanna Cherry is saying is that separate them both. Don't try and tell lesbians they have to have sex with males, because they won't like it, and it's cruel and abusive. But for children or people with distress of their bodies, then try and get to the cause of the distress, because as you say, only a tiny amount of these people will actually need lifelong medication and surgery, which some people do, but it's tiny. Most of them don't. So Joanna Cherry is trying to separate it. Now, this is what is the most cruel thing that's happening. The SNP, some of them, there's a faction inside that party who dislike Joanna Cherry, who see her as a rival, and the reason is because she's very likely to win the leadership if Nicola Sturgeon stepped down, because last year she got 70% of the delegate votes, and she'd be very likely to win the member vote. So it's a power play. The people who are Sturgeonites and probably support Angus Robertson for the leadership are trying to undermine and attack Joanna Cherry. So this is a party that is willing to use children, confused children who are confused about their sexuality, who are confused about their body, as weapons to attack an opponent, somebody they see as an internal rival. People, MPs that have never, do not care one iota, one jot for trans people, whether they're children or adults. They don't care about them. But what they do care about is having a weapon to attack one of their internal political rivals with. And that's just how immoral the whole thing is. That's where we are. We have a party of government that's willing to use vulnerable children to get one over on a political opponent. And what it causes is what you said, Kat. What it causes is that it brings up fear and anxiety in the community of children and young people that feel they're trans, and they think that other people hate them. And that's harming them. Using them as a political football is harming them. These people, these ideologues, these politicians, these men in their 50s are using this vulnerable community to attack a rival. It's the most immoral, awful thing that I can see. And they're harming that community. They're harming these people who are vulnerable. And then we saw the interview today with Nancy Kelly, and she from Stonewall, and she's CEO of Stonewall. And Stonewall's a big, bogeyman, so to speak. And she was asked, can you change sex? And she says, no, you can't change sex. So again, you've got a situation where the activists and the ideologues and the people in politics, the politicians, are making this far, far worse for trans people. And they've built a wedge between the gender critical people and the trans people that should not be there. I have spoke to transsexuals. They don't want any of this either. This is a political movement. It's done for political reasons. It's not a movement of the people, and it's certainly not a movement of trans people. So, but to go back to you, Cap, sorry, I was wanting to ask about sport, because your big thing is rugby, isn't it? And
yeah.
Yes, so you have some concerns about the way this is affecting women's sport.
Yeah, with rugby, the World Rugby guidelines are very reasonable in relation to this. They've done their homework on it, and they have stated that transgender women cannot compete in elite women's sports, but there are some exceptions in the more like kids area, which isn't as harmful, because obviously that's before kids go through puberty and before they develop like their muscle mass and their bodies develop it along those lines. But it is more that there are unions within rugby who are going against the World Rugby guidelines. France, for example, I think it was May or June this year, they said they would allow transgender women to compete in women's rugby, and the RFU in England have said within height and weight restrictions, which still doesn't make sense, because as you'll know, men and women's bodies and heart rates for this and everything, physically, bone structure, etc. Sorry if I'm not articulating it as well as I could be, but you know what I mean. That they're totally different. So to actually still have someone who has gone through male puberty going up against a woman in rugby, and my experience of refereeing rugby, the actual impact of the collisions that happen, they're totally different between men and women's games. So you'd have a man up against a woman, then there's a recipe for absolute disaster, and it's putting so many women in serious danger there. And I've spoken to a couple of folk about it happening in other sports as well. Like there was, they'll remain nameless, but there was a mother I spoke to who their daughter was part of a youth football team, and they were allowing this was teenagers, and they were allowing boys who were saying they were women into that team. And yeah, and the fact that was being allowed to happen, and they're being basically made to feel like they were transphobic if they didn't accept these male-borns into the team. It's yeah, that's the seriousness of the situation.
I suppose there's two problems. I would say with sport, you're always wanting fairness, aren't you? But if you have a team of 11 males versus another team that doesn't have males, the male team's going to win, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just biology, and you know yourself. I'm not being sexist here or saying that. It's just basic biology. I mean, and Lisa pointed out with her at her uni, that is just with everything going on in her case, it's just the simple biological differences, and it's a fairness thing, and it's a safety thing. And I think this is actually what really woke a lot of people up to the transgender issue, the idea of trans women competing in women's sports, and a lot of folk just thinking, no, I mean, not that they're being transphobic at all, they're just thinking this isn't fair. This is just really not fair.
And surely it would mean like no women's sports, because if you were a manager of a team, so say you are a manager of a football team, and it's a women's football team, why don't you just put all men on? So like for Scotland, I mean, we could want to win the Women's Scotland's World Cup, the Women's World Cup. Why don't we just field our male team? I mean, that would work. We'd win. Good idea.
I think it was Korea or some other country actually did field a mainly male, well, the trans woman team, and actually in the Olympics there was, I remember seeing a photograph, and it was a swimming relay team, and the transgender women swam first, and you could see there was like a huge difference. You know, the men were way out in front, the women were behind. Now it was mixed, and I believe they did catch up, but those teams won in the end because they're men, you know. And this is the thing, if we dilute our language and say that transgender women are not men, then we are denying the rights of women and girls. You know, it is so disrespectful. I can't even believe I have to sit here and defend my sex. You know, it's not up for debate. you know, sex isn't an opinion, it's just a fact of life. And, you know, we have sex separated spaces for a reason, and self-ID and allowing, you know, basically allowing predators to self-identify into women's spaces, how that can even be on the table is beyond me. And, you know, I wake up every day wondering this, and, you know, why we're lying to children, for example, and seeing the confusion amongst children. I find that very, very distressing. You know, children know boys and girls. There are only boys and girls. There are only women and men. And that is just a fact. And really, we should be redefining what it is to be a man. Yeah. So if these men, you know, feel benefit, you know, they feel a benefit of having cosmetic surgery to get breasts and invert their penis, etc., to have what aesthetically looks like a vagina but is not, then, you know, I don't have a problem with that, so long as they're adults. I have a huge problem with people suggesting this stuff to children, and that's where I think we all come from. As far as adults go, you know, frankly, you know, I think 16 is far too young, even 18 is far too young, maybe 21 would be a better age, just because you're more sort of mentally developed at that point. But people should be free to do these things if they want to as adults, but that does not make you the opposite sex. It will never make you the opposite sex, and we should really, really stop lying to children about this. I mean, I just can't believe what's happening, you know, at the moment.
I think the thing about it is you're selling them a lie. It's not really, it's selling them. You're selling them a lie. You're selling them the lie that they can change sex. And because they're young, they don't realize it's a lie. They're being marketed. And like you were saying, Kat, when you were younger, you were experimenting and unsure of yourself. And that's what most young people are like. So at that point, it's like very easy to manipulate someone and sell them a lie, basically.
And also very difficult then if children are affirmed at school and allowed to, you know, change pronouns and go into the opposite sex sports, wear clothing that makes them feel more like the opposite sex. Children can't come back from that. You know, it's very difficult for them then to think, you know, even if they think to themselves, oh, this isn't really what I want. How do they get back from that? Because I just remember being a child, and you don't want to admit to any mistake because you think you're silly, and for something so, you know, massive, as something as massive as this, no, we should not be affirming children like this in school. It should be explored. Affirmation therapy should not be in our schools. It should be nowhere near head teachers to make these sort of decisions. And psychologists should not just be offering affirmation therapy. And that comes from even David Bell, who ran the Tavistock. You know, if you listen to the Nolan podcasts, you can see all of that.
So just moving on slightly, I was going to tell you guys about something that happened in Brisbane. So a former nurse, has managed to avoid prison. It was, what was his name? Chloe Jessica Earle. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of extortion and a count of stalking, but the judge didn't want to sentence him. And I've got the quote here, what was said. So the judge, Paul Smith, said, "I can't ignore the fact that as a transgender person with male genitalia, if you went to a male jail, your safety would be at risk." He then went on, "There is no guarantee if you were sent to a female jail. In fact, it may be the reverse." And in Brisbane just now, there's a growing pattern of judges refusing to give conviction or sentence to transgender individuals. They're saying that being transgender, you probably wouldn't cope with being in prison. So for me, it looks like a little bit of a get out of jail free card just now.
Yeah. And who's suffering because of that? You know, if you think about all the victims of these people, getting no recourse in law. You know, where is the justice here?
There isn't any justice here at all. Basically, you've got men that are saying they're women and they're just saying, oh, well, you know, I've committed this crime, but I'm transgender. And the judge is obviously taking pity on them at that point, because he's saying, well, you're not in the mental place to go to prison, because if we put you in a male prison, you're in danger. If we put you in female prison, you're a danger. So like I say, it's just a get out of jail free card at the moment in Brisbane anyway. But I do fear things here are getting worse anyway. In Scotland, I've got lots of stats that I will not bore you with. Well, bad news for Scotland, the SPS collects data only on gender identity, meaning men who are identifying as women, regardless of GRC, are recorded as female anyway. And we can't get a clear definition on who is who. And only 5% of the population of prisoners in Scotland are actually female prisoners. Of the 5% of the female prisoners, 80% of them are sentenced for non-violent crimes, such as shoplifting. And 70% of these women that are actually in female prisons are survivors of domestic abuse. And we are then putting male-bodied people into these prisons with these vulnerable women. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, the idea that you can just self-ID as the opposite sex and be allowed into their prisons as well, it's just a safety thing. And as you said, with a lot of these women who've already been victims of abuse themselves, it's just absolutely nonsensical. But also I've seen the report, I think it came out from Keep Prisons Single Sex Bases, the organization Kate Coleman runs, where it was the article in the Times that said in the last 18 months, 12 transgender women prisoners have been housed in women's prisons, and only one of them had actually gone through the medical and surgical reassignment. So these are men just chucking on dresses and self-IDing as women and getting into women's prisons. It's absolutely absurd.
And I don't actually think they even have to wear a dress. I think it's basically just say, you know, I'm a woman.
Well, at present, we've got 163 transgender prisoners.
Something, because I actually had a look on your YouTube channel today, Kyle, and I noticed that you liked rugby and
Yes.
you like singing. But I actually watched one, and it was where you actually talked about pronouns, and I just wondered, what are your thoughts on calling men women?
I'd probably I'm going to go by what I think and what I'd probably be like if it was a social situation. I'd probably think if it was, you know, I would still think of them as men, but if they were really, it's a tough one, because I think I understand the whole thin end of the wedge thing that women have with this. If they were asked me, look, I would prefer you if you call me she, probably out of politeness in that social situation, I would probably say, yeah, okay. But I would also think, look, just don't go too crazy and don't be thinking that it gives you extra divine rights to go into women's spaces. But I go back to the whole thin end of the wedge thing, which I can understand. They might get in their head, oh, I'm a she, so I can do this. So yeah, it's something I find quite tough. I know I said out of politeness, but again, like, is it polite to lie to someone when they're not a woman? So
it's about words, and we've lost the word transsexual. And if you knew the person was transsexual and that they had altered their body and they didn't have a penis, then I think the acceptance of transsexual women in women's spaces would probably be more acceptable than the having men with penises in women's spaces, because I think that's what people are actually worried about.
Yeah.
And I think you can see the point of a transsexual woman being in women's spaces for a lot of reasons, but that's not really what we're worrying about. What we're worrying about is men with fetishes are accessing women, and just for their own personal fetish.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a disgusting YouTube videos online of men that were masturbating in women's toilets, I think, and also do it in women's changing rooms because it's their fetish. And we're also very worried about predators. But there's also a thing of dignity of women. There's safety and dignity. So a woman that's in a hospital bed doesn't want a man in the next bed to her. And men are generally frightening to women, and I think that's something that people maybe don't appreciate enough. Generally, women are frightened by men, and women constantly have to risk assess and monitor whether a man's a threat or not. And there's always a chance that a man that you assessed as not a threat turns into a threat. And that's when the rapes and sexual assaults and murders happen. And so being in a hospital when you're already very vulnerable and having a male that you're in the next bed is very psychologically damaging. And when the ideologues and the people pushing this talk about the psychological upset and hurt that trans people go through, they never consider the psychological trauma that a woman goes through when she's confronted by a male in what she thinks is a woman's safe space. So I think that they need to really consider that more. So on the subject of whether you call people she, I would feel like a transsexual, I would call she. And I know people would say, and that's a very...
I will say, sorry, Denise, I will say though that people like, you've already showed the video clip on a previous episode of that absolute insane person demanding that he be called ma'am in the shop in America. People like that, I would think, no, get to hell. I am thinking or addressing you however you want to be addressed, if you think that is the way to speak to people. So.
Yeah, I know. I think it is a sort of person by person basis, but it is difficult to make laws for it. But the important thing is the boundary and the choice.
So sorry, Denise. Denise. With regards to obviously the sex segregated spaces, I'm in full agreement there. I think absolutely they should not think it gives them a divine right to just walk into a women's space if they just, because of their fetish or what.
Yes.
Okay, so I asked that question for a reason, obviously, and I feel really quite strongly about this now. And I think if we start denying the biological reality of men and women, and if we dilute, because let's face it, the word that's being diluted here is not men, it's women, okay? And if we open women up and dilute that word to include words like cis and say that some women have a penis, and you're willing to say that some women who may have had sex reassignment surgery, yes, you'd be willing to call them she or whatever. That's certainly that is your prerogative. I'm very, very interested in the law side of this. And for example, the man in America who was on the video, and I think I've also featured him before as well, Call Me Ma'am, this guy. Now, for men who may have had sex reassignment surgery but don't pass as a woman, I think we have to be very careful. And now I read this story and it affected me very deeply, because before I was very much, as a politeness, I would say she, depending on who the person was. And that may still be the case, so long as I'm not compelled. This is the issue. If in law we are compelled, and that's the way that we're going, and by diluting language, that gives that credibility, okay? Language is what we use to describe ourselves as women. And that language also describes our oppression, because let's be honest, the people that are oppressed are and continue to be women. It's not transgender people who identify as transgender. This idea that they are some sort of marginalized, oppressed group is a nonsense. There are no.
I mean, you don't see any of them arrested for death threats on Twitter or having their being abusive at all.
The rise in hate crimes towards them, that includes ridiculous things like putting a sticker or a slate somewhere that someone may have the misfortune to read it and perhaps think for a moment about what they've read. But I think sex is a reality. And I'm all for people living whatever life they want in any way they want. But language is more important, and we need to make sure, I mean, for me, I'm completely clear now. Men who've had sexual reassignment or cosmetic surgery, they're still men. They're not women. You know, we are women. Our language is important, and we really, really need to do as much as we can to protect that. Now, we can be compassionate towards men who've got mental health problems, but that does not involve giving our language away and erasing us as a biological and political class. I am not in favour of that at all. And I think we should be very, very careful about what we are allowing to happen in law because of our kindness.
Yes.
You know, I'm about being kind, but on this matter, I'm about fairness.
Yeah, I mean, that's what.
Sorry.
So, no, I was just going to say, Claire, like I totally get your point. To me, when it comes to the law thing, I mean, to me, anything with relation to speech and law, because of my views on free speech, I think the law should only step into speech when it comes to cases of malicious falsehoods or threats or incitements to violence. But stuff like misgendering of that, to me, that's like, no, you know, if someone just refuses to see you how you want to be seen yourself, it shouldn't be a matter where the law steps in. I've got very hardline views on that, I think.
I think I'm probably quite close to your views on free speech, Cap. I'm very, very much an advocate of free expression and our right, and I think that it's being destroyed in Scotland. I think the sinister posters they put up, anybody, if you say anything wrong, you're going to get reporters of the police that are put up everywhere, and that's a chilling effect. It's against our right.
Yeah, and have you seen what's been happening at the University of St Andrews?
Yeah, well, I only saw that today. What was, you want to fill me in with the detail?
Well, basically, and what's her name, because I wrote it down. Yeah, Dr. Leila Hussein, who's, is she the rector? I think she is, they, them. And basically there has been graffiti, they call it graffiti, right? There's been someone has put some stickers or written something up that says trans women are men, which is a fact. You know, it's a fact. And apparently this is a hate crime. And they have posted up a big long post with Police Scotland contact details, etc., so that people can be reported. Now, if you're going to start police, you know, what environment is that for students, you know? And there must be so many students that are questioning this ideology, and yet they're young and impressionable, and they don't want to step out and say, actually, I also believe that. You know, we need to create an environment where they know there are other people around that feel exactly the same way that they do, and that sex matters. And, you know, this really needs to be nipped in the bud. We can't, it's heading to such a miserable place, isn't it? All this compelled speech.
It's basically telling us it's basically telling us to deny reality and go along with a cult. So that's it.
Exactly, it is a religion. You know, I think that's what I like about Exu Lanzik, because everything she talks about with respect to this, it's in relation to it being a religion, which it is. Now, sex isn't a religion. It's not my belief that I'm a woman. It's my actual reality that I'm a woman, and you, Kyle, you're a man.
Yeah.
I agree. I obviously I'm a big advocate for free speech as well. And just going back a little bit to when we were talking about pronouns, I don't think I could call a visible man she or her. I wouldn't feel comfortable, and I just don't see that I've got to feel uncomfortable to feed someone's mental health condition. I don't see why that's fair. You know, I would happily call them Joanne or Christine or whatever if they asked me to, but I just don't think I myself could comfortably call them she and her or he and him if that's how they want to be identified. It just makes me feel uncomfortable. And like I say, that's the whole point of this is not to make us feel uncomfortable so that they feel comfortable. It's so that everyone can kind of feel comfortable together.
Yes.
Just on that note, I think it's about time we wrap up. So do you want to give us your closing remarks, Denise?
Yeah, so I suppose my closing remarks this night, along with very many other nights that we've had, is to send support again to Joanna Cherry for the terrible bullying that she is suffering from her colleagues. And she's a very brave woman to continue to take this and do her job and stand up for women and for lesbians and for everybody really, and for children. So again, it is another time that Joanna needs our support, and she certainly has it.
And Claire?
Okay, so just going back a little bit, I wanted to just finish by saying that, you know, this is a mental health issue. It's a mental health crisis, actually. Now, being a lesbian or being a gay person, that is a sexual orientation. Having body dysphoria and thinking you are the opposite sex, that is a mental health condition. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very important that we contact our MPs and say conversion therapy is wrong. But this report that they are rushing through at the moment, they need to stop that just now. And I think, is it the cash report that they're waiting on? They should wait for that to come out. And let's take a more rational approach. We've got people like Nancy Kelly now being forced to discuss, Stonewall's position on all of this. And frankly, that's at odds with TRA activism. So that's going to be very interesting to see how that pans out for her. You know, the head of Stonewall is a transphobe. That's an interesting one.
Just before, I forgot to mention, but it's very important, you've reminded me, in ForWomen Scotland on their Facebook page, they have the Right to Your MP, MSP campaign ongoing. So everybody should write to their MSPs. It's about, the first one is children getting sent to England. 51 Scottish girls have been sent to England for double mastectomies. And another one is on prisons that you were talking about, Lisa. So if everybody could log on and write to their MSPs, and perhaps they'll get scared enough of the electorate to back off from their policies.
Can I say one thing very quickly? Sorry, just because you reminded me there, Denise, when you said that. But, think about 51 girls sent to England to have their breasts amputated. Look at your children. I can't help, nowadays, when I'm driving or walking in the street and I see young people and maybe, they might look a bit effeminate, boys, etc. I actually feel like pain inside of me. I know it's ridiculous, but I do. I just feel so worried for children these days. And, if anyone feels like that, write and tell them it's wrong. It's obscene. It's so obscene. I can't believe we're having to discuss it. Disgusting.
I did the ForWomen Scotland website thing. I'll put a link on this again for it. But so far I've had 2 responses, and that is all. And I sent out a lot more than 2.
I did. Sorry, I did my bit as well. And the only response I got was from conservative MSPs, which, considering I'm not a conservative, is it was nice of them to get back to me, but it's just kind of like, oh, come on, can you everyone else pull their weight, please?
And there's no guarantee that the Conservative position will not change.
Yeah.
Money is a huge motivator here. I mean, look what it's done to the Lib Dems. I mean, 1.5 million reasons why they promote this ideology, and in fact, there's a woman in the Labour Party today, and she was suspended. Now, what it was to do with menopause, something about women go through menopause, and she's been suspended, and she's actually resigned. And I think I commented and said, don't resign. Let's highlight this nonsense. These are women's issues, and we need this is going back again to language. It's so important. Stop calling men women. Let's start using proper language, respectfully accepting that some men do not conform to male, perceived male maleness, if you like.
On that note, Kyle, have you got any last words?
Not really, just thank you very much for having me on. I found it very interesting, especially with the pronoun stuff. Again, maybe this might be to do with the way our brains are wired. I might be thinking a little bit differently because I try to look at some compassion to both sides, but also I fully get from, you know, I like the fact you challenged me a bit on it, and that I get a bit more, I got to get more of, you know, compassionate perspective with regards to female language, because this ideology is affecting women probably more than any other demographic around right now. And,
you know, I used to feel the same way as you, and then I read this one story and it really affected me very badly. And it was about a woman who had been gang raped, and her experience afterwards at the police station, the rape centre, etc. She couldn't have a wash or anything for about 24 hours. And she just said, now bear in mind she'd been gang raped, she could smell these men on her, she could taste them. She, you know, everything about her whole life changed in that moment. And for her, imagine coming across a man that doesn't pass as a woman in the bathroom, and there's nothing she can do about it.
Yeah.
You know, these are the women that we fight for. I would not be that bothered about, well, some I would, like, hello, ma'am, that one I would. But generally, I would, you know, I probably wouldn't be that bothered. But for the women that are, you know, I can't disregard women's rights just to suit myself. These rights exist to protect the vulnerable, people in prison, women like her, you know, who would be completely traumatized by meeting a man in the toilet. So no, thank you. No.
Yeah. It's I just want to add, I think that's worse with when it comes to the rape crisis centres, with that person who runs the Edinburgh rape crisis centre. That absolutely infuriated me. Him saying that, you know, women who have suffered serious post-traumatic stress disorder should be told to reframe their bigotry after they've been victim of sexual assault. It's like, you know, how absolutely dare you? You know, just how dare you? I was going to swear there, but, you know, I'll try and keep it.
A man who lied to get into another man.
Yeah, that was terrible. Yeah,
it should have gone to a woman.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's no idea what it is to be a woman, and never ever will.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Kyle, and thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.